This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Michael Timms. He is a TEDx speaker, leadership development consultant, author, and founder of Avail Leadership, and has empowered thousands of senior leaders to adopt powerful leadership habits and practices that drive measurable improvements in team performance, engagement, and results across organizations. His latest book, How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, provides leaders with practical strategies to help shift their teams from complacency and finger pointing to a results-focused, continuous improvement mindset. The book has been described as the ultimate guide for embracing accountability as a leader by the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith, and is the basis of Michael's TEDx talk, How to Claim Your Leadership Power. So Michael, welcome to the program. Great to have you on today.
Well, great. Thanks, Steve. I'm glad to be here and have a chat with you.
So let's just start with a little context. Give us a little summary of your journey. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into this leadership thing? And just kind of give us a little summary, and then we'll dive into it.
Sure. So I grew up in the Vancouver, Canada area, and went to university in the U.S. I went to Utah State, and you want to know, so the background, my professional background, or?
So you went to college, and so what was your first career step, and kind of what's your background as your career, and then how did you get into this coaching consultant world?
Yeah, I went to school for finance. Originally, my dad is a financial advisor, and I just figured I'd go into business with him. And then I read in university, my parents gave me the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I'm like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is the stuff that I'm really interested in. And so I graduated in finance, but I continued on and did an MBA, and I decided, I'm like, I don't know, what do I go into to do this? I figured it was HR. So I graduated, so I got an MBA and I specialized in HR, and I worked in HR for about, I don't know, a dozen years or so. It did nothing close to what I wanted to do. It was all like recruiting, compensation, benefits, right? That sort of thing. And in the meantime, as I worked in industry, my bosses got progressively worse. And this last guy that I worked for was just kind of the ultimate kind of micromanager, sociopath. It was just brutal. And I remember thinking, I don't want anybody to feel the way that this guy is making me feel. So what can I do to prevent this from happening to anybody else? And that's when I really kind of went back to my first love of leadership and organizational behavior. And I set out on my own and started learning, researching, writing, consulting, and teaching about how to be an effective leader.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing that not amazing. It's so good, but the Stephen Covey book has certainly lasted the test of time.
It sure has.
That's been a long time ago, but people still refer to it all the time, and I still think it's very relevant to what's going on today. So
Yeah.
interesting you bring that up, and the other one that I heard you reference as well in the past is one of my go-tos that's lasted the test of time too, is the Peter Senge book, Fifth Discipline. So those are great leadership books that just keep on chugging. So
Yes, they are oldies but goodies for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your TEDx talk. I mean, it's it has 1.5 million views. I mean, that's impressive. That's very impressive. Tell us a little bit about how you got into doing a TEDx talk, and then we can talk a little bit about what you said during the discussion.
Sure. Yeah. I'm pretty happy. It's actually performing really well because it's got 1.5 million views in under a year, which I think which is pretty good.
Yeah.
So, anyways, the message resonates, and I think the message resonates with not just. I mean, I speak to people in leadership positions, and typically that takes the form of executive teams, management teams, but really. Uh, everybody is in almost everybody is in a leadership position in some capacity, right? If you're a
Right.
parent, if you're a coach, if you work in the community, and the principles that I teach about how to be an effective leader apply in all aspects of life. And I think that's why it's resonated with so many people. And actually, even the message sometimes, I think uh, the message when I oftentimes I'm sharing this message with a CEO, like a whole bunch of CEOs at the same time, and I think you wouldn't expect them to be open to that sort of message because it's all about really the message is, hey, look, if you want to improve things in your life, if you want other people to perform better, if you want your people to perform better, it starts with you.
Yeah.
And if people are not doing what you want them to do, there's likely something that you're doing or not doing that's influencing their behavior and perhaps causing the behavior that you don't want. And so you'd think that that actually would not be, that they would not like that message. But when I'm a little bit sneaky and I don't let them know right off the bat that that's going to be my message, but when I sort of reveal that message, you can really start to see the light bulbs go off in their minds and be like, oh yeah, okay, I could totally see that, you know, and then they're open to learning a little bit more.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, as you said, it doesn't matter if you're CEO or not, you can learn a lot from your points in the talk. And you start off by giving an example of your three daughters trying to get them off to school, and what their expectations are and what your expectations are, and not being clear on that. It just I thought that was a great way to start it. But let's just discuss a little bit on that TED Talk. You talk about, there's really three, leadership traits that can really accelerate performance with your team. So why don't you just give us those three and kind of tell us what you're trying to say there.
Sure. I think, and I'll just back up and say that a lot of times when people come to me and ask for my help, they're basically asking for the Holy Grail, which is like, hey, Michael, how can I get people within my organization to take greater ownership of their work? How can I get greater trust, collaboration, innovation, um, and teamwork? Can you come and deliver a keynote in an hour that's going to give that to us? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Flip the switch,
so
then we can solve all our problems, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And but to be honest, the message that I share really is the groundwork. That is the foundation for all of those things. Um, and so the principles that I teach are I call them the three habits of personal accountability. And they have this really interesting effect. I think a lot of times, people want when you want other people in your life to be more accountable, to take ownership for their mistakes and to take ownership for solutions to common problems. Um, a lot of times we're thinking, well, what's wrong with them? If they would just be more accountable, then all my problems would be solved, right?
Yeah.
But what I have found is that the best way to inspire other people to take greater ownership of problems and solutions is for you to increase your level of accountability. And you can do that. You can actually boil it down into three simple habits. Habit one is don't blame.
Hmm.
Blame kills accountability in yourself, and it kills accountability in those that you blame.
Yeah.
Habit two is look in the mirror. So acknowledge your part in the problem, because if you are if you're within the system that created the problem, you likely contributed to it in some way, and it's important for you to figure out what is your part and acknowledge that. And then habit three is engineer the solution, which means we are predisposed, the way our brains are wired, we are predisposed when we see a problem to focus on the human element and say, that that is causing my problem. He or she is causing my problem. When in fact, the reality is there's usually a lot of other things at play that are contributing to our problems, but we just don't see them. And there's some really interesting reasons why we don't see them, but we don't see them. And engineering the solution is really taking a systems thinking approach and saying, hey, look, before I start blaming other people, like in the example that you shared, before I start blaming my daughters for why they're not getting out of the door on time, maybe I should look at the other factors, environmental factors, my own behavior, to see if they might be contributing to the problem. And can we fix those in a way that it's going to provide a sustainable solution as opposed to kind of you know, our default solution to all problems is you should be more careful next time, or you just need to do this and just nag people, right? Which we know is not sustainable. So believe it or not, personal accountability really can be boiled down to those three things. Don't blame. Look at yourself first, look in the mirror, and engineer the solution. Um, and those three habits have this sort of magical impact, magical influence on other people's behavior so that they begin to be more willing to acknowledge their part in problem and focus on sustainable solutions, which is that's really what we're after, right? Whether we're a parent, whether we're a leader at, in a large organization, whether we're, like I said, kind of working in the community, that's really what we want from the people who work around us is, yeah, hey, this is my part. This is what I'm going to do to fix it.
Yeah. Well, it's a great TED Talk. You did a wonderful job. It was very professional, and I was impressed. So, if people do want to watch that and increase that 1.5 million viewers, how do they find that?
Oh yeah, well, so you can just Google Michael Timms, and
Okay.
that's going to be the first thing that's going to pop up.
Okay.
But the name of the talk is "How to Claim Your Leadership Power."
Okay. Great. And then you've also recently written a book and released it, and it's called How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability. So again, taking the same concepts from the TEDx talk, but just expanding it and getting deeper and talk more detail about those points that you just brought up.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. And so I'd say start with the TED Talk. If you like the TED Talk, if it resonates with you and you're like, hey, you know what? Either, I could benefit from learning a little bit more about this. Other people could learn, benefit from this. Then I would suggest check out the book. And Steve, you've done both. And you know that the book is a much deeper dive on that TED.
So tell me a little bit about how you got in front of an audience at a TEDx event. Is that something that you chose to do and went after? Is it somebody grabbed you and said, "Hey, you should do this"? I'm just curious the process of how you go from the idea of doing it to actually getting on stage to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different TEDx venues. It was a TEDx talk that was that was actually picked up by TED, and and they put it on their website. It became a TED talk. But the way that I mean, the process that I just applied.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different TEDx venues around. I chose a pretty big one, a pretty big venue, and it was a great one. It's TEDx Surrey, which I think is probably the premier TEDx venue in Canada. Put a lot of effort into vetting their speakers and preparing their speakers. So I actually applied three times. The first time I was just turned down flat. They didn't like my script. The second time, and I got some feedback. The second time, I changed my script, and this is years later, and so because it's only
Yeah.
once a year, right? And
Right.
so the next year I came back, and they liked my script, and they had me deliver it, and they didn't like that, and so I didn't make it. I made it the third time, so it was persistence.
Well, that's great. That's great. And I mean, it's not only do you have to write it, as you said, they look at it and they want you to edit it sometimes and whatever, and then you have to be a person who's able to deliver the message. I mean, you can't be a mediocre speaker. You got to be somebody that can deliver the message. So I'm just intrigued because a lot of people think, oh, I'd like to do a TED Talk, which is great, but there's a lot of prep and a lot of practice going into it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the key thing, Ted will tell you this. Do you have an idea worth sharing? And a lot of people, a lot of like everybody in my business tends to have a book, because and they just kind of pontificate on those things that these are the things that I learned and great. But is it really an interesting idea? Is it really a novel idea or kind of a new take on an old idea? That's really what you got to have if you want to be able to share a message, at a TEDx event and kind of have 1.5 million views in a year.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So let's talk little bit about the blame part that, is in the book and the TED Talk, and you talk about how that blame triggers, the fight or flight response. And I had a recent guest on, and I've said this many times because it just resonated with me so much, is when you get into the fight or flight response, 75% of your brain shuts off because now you're just trying to, you know, get away from the tiger, or whatever, so whenever you do that and you trigger somebody's fight or flight response, the chance to communicate and work something out in a positive solution goes way down because they're just not they're not functioning on all their faculties in their brain.
Yeah, and that's just something that, I didn't learn later in life, and I wish I learned that earlier. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. Well, especially I'm a bit of a hothead, and I know I can get kind of riled up pretty easily, and so um, but it is really interesting when you allow yourself to get riled up. You just become instantly stupider, right? You just become instantly dumber, and you can't articulate your thoughts very well. You can't argue very well. You can't problem solve. And that is the challenge with that fight or flight. And the thing about not blaming is directly tied to that. The reason why step one, there's a lot of things that I can share with you about how to create a culture of trust and psychological safety and innovation uh, and teamwork. But the very first thing that I can teach you is you just got to eliminate the blame, because our brains interpret blame the same way they interpret a physical attack. So, like you said, it triggers that fight or flight response. And what happens, earlier I said blame kills accountability in ourselves and others. So, first of all, it kills accountability in others, because when people either are blamed or are afraid that they will be blamed, nobody, when a problem happens, nobody's going to stick up their hand and say, you know what, that was my bad, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it, right? Nobody's
Yeah,
going to do that if they think that they're going to be blamed for doing so, right?
yeah,
If they think that somebody's going to take advantage of them, rub their nose in it. So it kills accountability in others when you blame them, or they fear being blamed. They are not going to take accountability, right? But it also kills accountability in yourself.
hmm,
Because when you blame other people or things for your problems, what you're saying is, I have no part in this. I am a total victim here. And I have no power to create a better future for myself.
yeah, yeah,
And so you're completely abdicating all power, to change your outcomes to that thing or that person that you're blaming. And so as you blame other people, or things for your problems, you eliminate any power that you have to create a better future. So,
yeah,
and you kill accountability in yourself, because, like I said, the reality is, and this is something that we learned from this. I talked earlier about systems thinking. Um, A principle of systems thinking is that if you are part of the system in which a problem was discovered, you likely contributed to that problem.
right.
And so there's very few situations in our lives where we can say, for sure, bad things happen, right? But the majority of the time, we have a hand in bringing ourselves to the situation that we're currently in, if that's a good situation or not. So,
And just having that mindset shift that you talked about, where instead of blame, you kind of ask yourself, what may I have contributed to this problem or issue? Because as you said, if you're involved, likely you contributed in some way. So let's explore that. I think the example you use in the book, which is great too, is a lot of people have heard about Jocko, who's the Navy SEAL who, had this horrible situation in Iraq and where people died, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, what happened? What happened?" And he owned it. And he basically said, this is what I could have done better. This is the mistakes I made. And most people, especially in the military like that, with that kind of a mistake would be fired and probably prosecuted. But the way he handled it and the way he did it was he did not get fired. And as a matter of fact, he continued on his career. And now everybody knows him because he wrote a great book and he's a great leadership example.
Yeah, and a lot of times people are afraid. Well, hey, and to be honest, there are many environments where it is career suicide to take ownership for problems, right? And that's these cultures, these toxic cultures, and even actually, you know what? I'm going to back that up because even like non-toxic cultures, just where there's finger pointing, there's lack of cooperation, that's a result of people not taking ownership, of people not sticking up their hand because they're afraid, because they feel like if I do, I'm going to get blamed and it's going to be a bad situation. But if you have the courage to do that, and to sincerely and not make up stuff, I'm not talking about falling on your sword and taking the blame for every problem. That's not helpful.
Right.
That's not going to get you to sustainable solutions. But to take a thoughtful, sincere look and say, hey, look, you know what? I could have done this better and I didn't, and that probably contributed to where we're at, and I'm going to own that. If you have the courage to do that, people's respect for you instantly goes up,
Yeah.
and your credibility instantly goes up, and people are far more willing to listen to you and trust you. And when you if when somebody's doing something that's not working for you and you say, hey, what's your part in this problem, they're way more likely to have a positive response to that and be like, you know what, you're right, Michael. Um, yeah, I dropped the ball too, and I could have done better, right? But if
Yeah.
I don't go first,
Yeah.
nobody else is going to do it. And so that's true leadership. Leadership is scary. Leadership requires courage. And to be a true leader, you do need to, on a regular basis, when you encounter a problem, say, hey, look, what is my part in this? And if I can't see my part in this, and that's why I phrase it that way, how may I have contributed to this problem? Maybe I haven't. And if I can't see it, then I'm going to say, hey, Steve, look, you know what? We're not in a good place here. Can you see, honestly, tell me, is there anything that I have done or could have done differently to help us be in a better situation? Like that engenders trust and respect. And you're like, yeah, you know what, Michael, honestly, here's something you could have done. And I would have been, hey, thanks. Now everybody who has heard that interaction is like, okay, Michael's open to hearing what his part in the problem, and I am now feeling it's safe for me to admit my problem, my mistakes, right? It's okay.
Yeah.
It's not just okay. It's kind of acceptable, especially when the person with a formal authority, actually leads out and does that. Then everybody else gets the message. This is the way we do things here. We do own our own part, and we use that as inputs to our problem solving. And as we do that, we come up with better, more sustainable solutions.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point when you say, if you can look at it from the perspective of it's not someone's fault or it's not someone's character, it's there was something that broke down in the process. And so, if you can look at it that way, then people are less likely to take offense to, it's all about me, me, me. It's about the process, the group uh, activity or the group systems that we used. Let's look at that first, and so on. And as you said, it could be a person just screwed up, and you have to deal with that as well. But at least you start with a process to see what happened.
Yeah, and the great question to ask when you encounter a problem and you resist that urge to blame, you look in the mirror, you say, "Hey, look, did I have a part in this?" And I'm going to acknowledge that. But then the next great question is, okay, where did the process break down?
Yeah.
Instead of who did this, right?
Right.
Um, and you get a much more positive reaction when you say, "Hey, where did the process break down?" Because you're signaling to people a couple things. You're signaling, um, number one, I'm not out for blood.
Yeah.
I want the solution. And I'm also open to the fact that there could be multiple causes here. And so you're communicating, those both of those things as you ask that question, and people tend to respond far more positively to that.
Yeah, another point you make in the book that I think is interesting too, which we all know this, but people keep doing it, which is one of those things. Why do you keep doing something that doesn't work? But being an ex-HR guy, the annual reviews are just ridiculous, right? And but people still do them, and I don't know if that's pressure from HR that you got to do it, you got to document, you got to do whatever. But you make a point in the book that there's a much better way to communicate your clear expectations and hold people accountable than doing it once a year at an annual review.
Yeah, did you happen? I actually just published an article on my website. And so by the way, for any of your listeners, if you're curious about how I can get rid of performance reviews, Google Michael Timms, check out my website and look for that article. It's
Yeah.
how to end performance reviews. And I give you kind of a step-by-step guide about kind of what are the key principles to do that. But yeah, getting back to what you were talking about, Steve, um, the key building block to having effective relationships is getting clear on expectations. And so often we don't do that with our key relationships. And if you take a look at any relationship breakdown, anytime that whether it's a romantic relationship, a work relationship, a neighbor relationship, a friend relationship, anytime that you see a breakdown in a relationship, you can almost always trace that back to at least one party is not getting their needs met. At least one party is not having their expectations met. And so, but oftentimes we haven't articulated what our expectations are of that other person. And so, so many communication breakdowns could be avoided if we would simply, at the beginning of each of our relationships, each of our key relationships, just say, hey, here's what I need from you. Or actually, hey, why don't I start off with, what do you need from me? What are the key things that you need from me? Here's what I need from you. Can we agree to these things? And can we agree to touch base, on a somewhat regular basis on how we're doing meeting each other's expectations or commitments to each other? And it doesn't have to be a formal thing. I mean, one of the key things, is that one of those expectations you should always include in any of your key relationships is please give me feedback. If something isn't working for you, please let me know. Because without that explicit invitation, people probably won't feel comfortable telling you. It will build up, it will, and it will probably come out in passive aggressive ways,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
creates this terrible cycle. And so my even like when I have a new neighbor, when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I know I'm gonna have to have some sort of relationship with them. I will always say, hey, if something's not working for you, please let me know. And I hope you're open for me to do the same with you. And that's one very basic expectation that I think you should be setting with all of your key relationships. But if you take some time, you can probably and say, hey, look, would you mind just, for example, a manager, an employee, new employee, you say, hey, can we set some time aside next week and so we can talk about, what you need from me and what I need from you so that we can both be successful? Most people are open to having that discussion. And if you do that and agree to touch base on that on a somewhat regular basis, guarantee you're going to have way less friction in your relationships, and it creates a communication mechanism for addressing those friction points when they do come up.
Yeah, and when I was a CEO, I'd say the same thing is that, most personnel issues or employment issues or even performance issues, I would agree. It all comes down to there were different expectations or they didn't understand the expectations. Those are the two key things. So I think you make a really good point.
Hey, Steve, can I just interject
Sure.
one thing I hear a lot, especially in senior management ranks, is, oh, they should know that by now. They have, they're a senior enough person. They should know that by now, which is a bunch of crap, because really what you're saying is they should be able to read my mind, right?
Yeah.
They're corporate experiences should be exactly the same as my corporate experiences, and so they should know by now. So if you find yourself thinking that, that's or saying that, that is absolutely a sign that you need to. First of all, I think that's a complete cop out. It's a
Yeah.
cop out for not having a tough conversation. Well, I don't want to have a tough conversation, so I'm saying, going to say they should know that by now, and we should just fire them, which is how a lot of senior managers think. But if you think that, that's a sign that you do need to explicitly state your expectations. So
Yeah.
sorry,
Well,
I just had to
you
just
know that
jump on that
that's a
soapbox for a minute.
It's a great point. And it also comes back to this point that you say in the book too, where, you know, if you give CEOs choices to work on things and you list them out, the last one they always pick is the personal accountability, right? It's just, they either think they don't want it or they don't want to hear about it. So that's an interesting phenomenon, I think.
Yeah, well, that's actually what I do when I start off when I'm speaking to a CEO group. I don't tell them that I'm going to be talking about personal accountability. I just say, I mean, I really just kind of use the title of the book and say, how I'm going to teach you how to inspire accountability in others. And so they're all keen. Okay, wow, you teach me, Michael, how am I going to whack these people over the head and get them in line? And after we talk about the definition of accountability for a little bit, then we talk about and I kind of set them up, and we do this little psychological experiment. And what I do is I have this live polling app, and I just ask them. I say, "Hey, look, there are basically three ways in which you can create more accountability within your organization. One is through your own personal example. Two is the way in which you hold people accountable. And three there are some changes you can make within the organization, some organizational changes you can make that will make it easier for people to get the right results. If you had the choice of what to learn about today, because we don't have time to talk about all these things, if you had the choice, what would you prefer to learn about?" And so, but I always tell whoever's hosting the meeting, I always tell them how people are going to vote. And before I reveal the results, I turn to that person. I say, "Okay, I told you, like we can't see the results, but I told you how they're going to vote. What did I say?" And they're going to say, the last thing they're going to want to learn about is how to be a better example of accountability. It's like, okay, let's reveal the results. 100% of the time. That's the last thing people want to learn about because everybody, and I do that to reveal we all have a bias around accountability. Anytime that I'm talking to anybody about accountability, your immediate reaction is, man, if other people really need to hear your message, Michael, other people, right? And it's like, actually, my message is for you. And we all have this bias that we are totally accountable, and it's other people who need to work on improving their accountability.
Doesn't
When
that seem crazy though? Because you think of every leadership thing I've ever heard, and most senior leaders know this, that to be a good leader, you first have to know thyself. So if we could all agree on that, it just seems crazy to me that that's not more front of mind, when you talk about leadership training.
Well, everybody has heard that, and as soon as you said that, I thought about that last boss that I had, who was just a total,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
not a great guy. I am sure he would agree. He'd be, people have this bias around accountability because we all know, the old adage, the old Greek adage, know thyself, right? Know thyself is really kind of the first step of being an effective leader. But and I think most people do know that. But my question to you is, okay, how do you get to know yourself? Because most people will be, oh, I know myself. I know myself pretty well, right? And everybody thinks that. But how do you get to know yourself? The way you get to know yourself is not by having a conversation with yourself. It's by asking other people for feedback. So if you think, oh, I know myself and I totally understand that, I've got to know myself. Okay, let's test that theory. When was the last time you asked anybody for feedback about your performance? When was the last time you went to somebody and said, "Hey, Steve, how can I do better as a podcast guest?"
Hmm.
Right? When was the last time you went to somebody and said, "You know what? How can I do better at facilitating meetings or leading meetings? How can I do better at giving you feedback?"
Yeah.
When was the last time you asked those questions? Because I do leadership assessments when I work with an executive team or management team. We start off the leadership development program by doing assessments. That is, Steve, almost always the lowest rated item
Yeah.
is that this leader asks for feedback on a regular basis. They don't, and we don't. And so how can we possibly know ourselves if we're not asking for feedback?
Yeah, exactly. And in the book, you also give a quote from Albert Schweitzer, which I've heard before, but I think is great. It's the quote is, "Example is not the main thing in influencing others; it is the only thing." You know, and so again, if you wanting people to be accountable and take feedback, then you got to be willing to do that as well. So, yeah.
You got it.
Another thing we referenced the book earlier, but talking about the superpower of systems thinking, and the process and so on. And the Peter Senge book, talks a lot about having learning organizations, and I like the quote too, where true leadership is really to elevate others. So how do you do that? And you got to set up programs and opportunities for people to learn and grow, and that's the definition of a learning organization.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things there, setting people up for success and that superpower of systems thinking. I call it a superpower because, it is kind of like X-ray vision. It's the ability to, when you're seeing things that are not going well, and you're like, man, we just keep getting the wrong results or less than ideal results here. What's going on? Again, our default, our psychological and actually even our biological wiring, our default is to look at the people part of the equation. And that's
Yeah.
the only part of the equation that we can see. Systems thinking is sort of putting on these X-ray vision, glasses and being able to see what's actually going on. Why are people behaving the way that they're behaving? Why do people keep making the same mistake? And oftentimes the answer is that either the system that we're following, that we oftentimes don't know we're following, but the system that we're following is sometimes encouraging us to make a mistake. I'll give you an example. Um, I just told you that I do live polling, and it's this application that has, and we have a number of live polling templates. One day I discovered that one of those templates was deleted, and which is pretty annoying because I don't have a backup, and I would have to kind of try to remember all the things, all the questions on this thing. So I talked to my assistant. I'm like, hey, do you know anything about this? She says, no. And that left one other person in our organization. Her name was Mel. And when we both realized, oh, it was probably Mel who did it, my assistant, she was like, oh, I'm going to murder Mel. And I was like, wait, actually, I teach something about this. I was
Yeah.
like, maybe let's just follow the 3 habits of personal accountability. And and so okay. And my assistant, her name was Carrie. And I was like, Carrie, let's not blame. Nope, we're still angry. Okay, let's go on to habit 2. Let's look in the mirror. Let's look in the mirror. And as soon as I said, hey, what may I have done to contribute to this problem? And I realized, oh, you know what? I have almost accidentally deleted one of these templates. And then Carrie, she's like, you know what? I've almost accidentally deleted one of these templates myself. And I said, well, how could we both have almost accidentally deleted this? It's because our templates were mixed in with our work in process. Um,
Mhm.
and we were deleting our work in process often. So, there's a very simple system solution. Create a folder called templates and put all the templates in the folder to protect them, to prevent them from getting deleted. But what we had done, and you used the term setting people up for success, Steve. What we had done is we had inadvertently created a system, or rather is a lack of system, that was a trap waiting for one of us to fall into this trap. Mel happened to be the first one of us to fall in that trap, and accidentally delete a template when she shouldn't have. But it was who's responsible? I'm responsible. I'm the responsible for setting up the systems and processes and kind of safety mechanisms in our organization to prevent things like this from happening. But in most organizations, what happens is the junior person, the person who, they get blamed. You should know better. You should be more careful. They have a bad experience. And if Carrie did have that conversation and quote unquote murder Mel, um, we maybe not, Mel maybe wouldn't have stuck around for very long.
Yeah.
Right? But that happens in organizations all the time. But it's this X-ray vision of this when you can put on your systems thinking glasses, and you can actually start to see, okay, why are people making these mistakes? Then you can come up with sustainable solutions, and that is a learning organization.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Another thing you referenced in the book was, I think, so many of us, just look at, Abraham Lincoln and see, the example of leadership and in the book, A Team of Rivals, it's just amazing to me that people that, attacked him and went after him and tried to ruin him and whatever, that he ended up putting a lot of those people on his cabinet, because he thought they were the smartest people. So, sometimes we just do kind of have to let our egos and let them go a little bit and say, what is best for the team, what is best for the country in this case, and put those people together. And I think that takes a very strong and inward-looking person to be able to do that, and not just come out swinging.
I think another thing that it takes is confidence.
Yeah,
And that's what it takes to ask for other people's feedback, and ask for other people's advice.
yeah,
Only confident people, really are able to take people's advice and feedback about their performance.
yeah,
Because it's like, insecure people, when you tell me I'm doing something wrong, it just shatters me. It shatters my fragile ego. Oh, I can't take it, right?
right,
But it's
right.
confident people who are willing, who you know reach out and ask for contrarian perspectives to help enlighten them to say, hey, look, I am not omniscient. I need other people's perspectives here to get better outcomes. But it takes confidence to be able to do that when they disagree with you. And they're inevitably going to disagree with you. They're inevitably going to tell you that you're doing things you shouldn't be doing. Confident people are okay because they're like, hey, you know what? I know what I'm good at, and that and I'm confident in my ability to navigate through situations, um, and I'm confident in my ability to hear other people's perspectives and come out with the right solution. If that's where you're getting your confidence from, you're in great shape. If you get your confidence from being, like the smartest person in the room, you're gonna have a tough life.
Yeah, no question. And again, in that book, Team of Rivals, my favorite story in that book is when President Lincoln sends his chief of staff over to Secretary of State Seward, or maybe it was the vice president. I can't remember which one it was, but they went over and to give a document and say, I want, get him to sign this document. And then the chief of staff came back with his kind of head bowed and shaking his head, and he said, "Well, what do you say? What do you say?" And the chief of staff said, "Well, I can't tell you what he said." And he says, "No, tell me what he said." And he says, "Well, he said this was ridiculous, and you're an idiot, and I'm not going to sign it." And so President Lincoln got his hat and his coat and put it on and says, "Well, I got to go over and talk to him." And the chief of staff said, "Why would you go talk to him? He just called you an idiot." He says, "Well, pretty much everything he says is right. So if he said I'm an idiot, I got to figure out what I'm missing. So I need to go talk to him." I mean, again, what a great example of not just, putting up a wall and getting your ego hurt and getting pissed off and whatever. It's like, well, I got to go find out what he's talking about. So that's kind of a great example, I think, of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
being willing to be wrong creates the psychological safety that everybody else needs to admit their mistakes and to innovate, to
yeah,
come up with creative solutions, right?
yeah,
So yeah, if everybody is, and another thing in order to have that confidence to be able to do that, obviously you have to have confidence in your own abilities, but you also have to have confidence that your teammates are not out to get you.
yeah,
And that's why, facilitating trust and creating trust and eliminating blame is so critical to all of this. Yeah, I mean, before I can accept people's criticism of me, I have to know that they're doing it in a way that they're just trying to get the right result. They're not trying to step on top of me to elevate themselves.
Yeah. I love how you give real life examples that we can all relate to, and how the system breaks down, or the process was wrong, or you didn't go with your gut. You talked about back in the Bush administration, where the weapons of mass destruction, where Colin Powell you know testified in front of the UN that this was happening, and he didn't really feel good about it, and he didn't have time to do the homework he needed to do, but he did it anyway, and then come to find out that it was totally wrong. So I thought that was an interesting example. And then also the nuclear arms race, back in the Cold War, where people were just, between Russia and the U.S., they just kept adding more and more weapons. When I think you gave the quote, there were 64,000 nuclear weapons between the two countries, and each country only needed 100 to wipe
Yeah.
out the world.
Yeah.
So what in the heck is going on? There's definitely a breakdown in the system in that situation.
Yeah, how did we get there? And it was actually Peter Senge who I actually took that from his book. That was something that he pointed out in his book, The Fifth Discipline, which is just a classic example of how did we get here,
Yeah.
right? And and you look back, and it's easy to look back at people in history and say, how could they be so stupid? But really, if we were in that system, we would almost for sure behave the same way, right? Well, if we're afraid of what they're doing, well, we got to do this, right? It's just, but nobody kind of steps back to kind of put on that those systems thinking glasses to see what's actually going on, right?
Yeah, yeah. Those are, you know, real life and kind of horrific examples of what can happen, So we should learn from those. The other thing I thought was really good, with my medical background, it resonated with me when you said, accountability. You need to diagnose it before you prescribe something, So a lot of times people are trying to fix things that don't need fixing, or aren't the thing to fix, So you gotta be good on your diagnosis, and you gotta be good on figuring out what did go wrong.
Yeah, I'm just going to digress here just for a little bit, because I think it is important for your listeners to understand why we have such a tough time diagnosing problems. Um, and it's called the fundamental attribution bias. And it's a very well studied psychological phenomenon that now with fMRI technology, we're actually starting to see it's not just a psychological thing. It's actually literally the way that our brain is wired and processes information, which is why we keep coming to these wrong conclusions. But the fundamental attribution bias is essentially this. If we walk into a room and we see a problem, and and we also see in that same room 10 things that may have caused that problem. If one of those things is a human being, that's the only thing we can see.
Hmm.
That is the only thing our brain latches onto. It's that person. And it's the same reason why when we read stories about major disasters, like for example, that crash in India, one of the first things that you will see, and actually you take the other, Boeing crashes in I think in Africa and the Philippines, the
Right.
first thing people go to is pilot error.
Yeah.
They must be an idiot. They had poor training, whatever. But the first thing people latch onto is the human error without considering the other components. And I got to tell you, this was a key turning point in my life to being able to produce better results for myself is when I could see myself instantly blaming the person in a problem. But because I knew about that psychological phenomenon, I'd be like, oh, you know what? Like, for example, if I can't find my keys, instantly, I know my wife maliciously hid them on me.
Yeah.
Right. But since I've learned that, I'm like, oh, that's this fundamental attribution bias. That's actually my amygdala giving me that answer.
Yeah.
That's actually not my big brain. That's my amygdala. That's my lizard brain giving me that answer. And that's probably not the correct answer. So I think it's really important if we want to talk about getting better at diagnosing, we have to become aware of the biases that are going around in our brain that are blinding us to the real sources of our problems
Yeah.
and focusing us unnecessarily and initially and instantly on people are the problem.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great point. And then explain to us a little bit too about you talk about the lessons learned debrief. So what is a lessons learned debrief and how do you do that in a company?
A lessons learned debrief is a systematic way of looking in the mirror. It's an organizational practice of looking in the mirror, right? When I say look in the mirror, I'm talking about an individual thing. It's like, hey, how may I have contributed to this problem? Lessons learned debrief is where we get a team together and you can do this either on, if you're a project-based organization, you'll want to do this at the end of every project. If you're not a project-based organization, you want to probably just pick a regular cadence, a regular time of doing lessons learned debriefs. And you're just looking back at the last period of time and you're asking, hey, what, either on this project or on this period of time, what went particularly well?
Hmm.
Why did it go particularly well? And is there anything that we can do to make sure that that continues to happen next time?
Hmm.
And we also ask, okay, what didn't go very well? Why didn't it go very well? Is there anything that we can do to make sure that this goes better next time, that we don't fall into those same mistakes next time?
Yeah.
And again, it's when you do it that way. I actually had there was one person. I teach these principles to lots of leadership teams. There's this one person, and she's a manager of a store, and she came back and she said that one practice um, dramatically increased her leadership scores from one assessment to the next because it created this. She's like, it's kind of replaces performance reviews. Like
Yeah.
we're now, it's because everybody comes into these with an open mind, knowing that the purpose is to look at our successes and to look at where we drop the ball
Yeah.
and to fix this to make sure that we're better next time.
Yeah.
And when you come into a meeting with that expectation, you're way more open to saying, yeah, you know what? And I could do this differently. I could do this better. And she said, yeah, it's like performance management made easy because we're all in the room, kind of picking apart our, what we could have done differently or how we can change the process to produce a better result. And it's such a collaborative effort. It's providing people feedback, and it's building trust.
Yeah.
And so anyways, it's a really, really cool practice that, I've been part of an organization that just did not do that. And they were a stupid organization. They never learned from their mistakes and they continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. And new people, they would rely on, oh, well, people who have the experience. Well, when the people who have the experience either aren't there or have left the company, you've got new people coming in. There's no way to retain that. And let me back up. The way that you retain that is to, once you've got these lessons learned, to incorporate them into your standard operating procedures.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, Michael, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to be sure and get into the program?
No, Steve, I think we've had a good discussion. I appreciate you introducing me to your listeners. My goal is I want to help people have better lives. I want to help people solve their problems and have better outcomes. I know a lot of times people feel like their problems are a result of relationships and the people working with them. And yeah, I think I've learned a handful of really powerful habits and practices that make a tremendous positive impact over the long term. And so yeah, if you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to reach out to me. Find my website, and you can reach out to me that way. Um,
That's great.
I've been really, appreciate you having me on the show, Steve.
Well, at this point in the interview, Michael, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
It's something that I've already mentioned to you.
Yeah.
Um, if you do one, if you want to be a better leader, everybody around you knows the answer. You might not, but the people around you do. Ask them,
Wow.
and ask them the right way, which is ask them not, hey, what am I doing wrong? Ask them for advice. Ask them for specific advice. Say, hey, look, I want to do better at managing my meetings. What can I do differently can you give me some advice on how I can manage this meeting better? Can you give me some advice on how I can handle this situation better? People will tell you if you ask, but my experience is people in leadership positions rarely ask the most important question, which is, how can I do better?
Yeah, well said, well said. Well, Michael, this has been a pleasure. It's great talking with you today, and I wish you the greatest success for your book and more views on your TED Talk. And I think you're right on with your concepts. It's good to talk to somebody who sees the light, and hopefully it will help others see it as well. So thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I've enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, Steve.
Take care. Bye
You
bye.
too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.